I'm very happy to be here. Hello, everyone. I'm always happy to be in a SOFA meeting because I meet really great people, people who inspire me in this group. So my name is Pascale. I will present myself at some point in the presentation. I have prepared a PowerPoint presentation so that I can talk to you about the topic that we have at hand is the crossroads between theory U and sociocracy. So I think I'm going to go ahead and launch this presentation. I'm going to try to keep it within those 30 minutes, and then we have 15 minutes for a conversation on the topic. Yes, is everyone okay with that? Before we start, I have one question. Are you very familiar with sociocracy? So just post in the chat, yes or no. Okay. Ooh, okay. Fantastic. Are you very familiar with theory U? Less, but somewhat. No. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with what I'm seeing here because it corresponds to the way I built this talk, where I'm giving more information on theory U and then relating it to sociocracy, but I wasn't going to explain sociocratic technology because I figured out that people here would know something about it. So really great, good. I am going to share my screen with you. Theory U and sociocracy. If you want to contact me, you have the email right here, info@learntochange as a good email to reach me. And why is it doing that? First time I see that. I'm trying to go to my next slide. Going boop, boop, which is not a good thing. Good. So what am I going to talk about? Relating both the basics of sociocracy and theory U, exploring how they connect, and asking questions about how we show up in sociocratic meetings. Because actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to stay on the level of the listening and presencing aspects of theory U. I'm not going to go into the whole model, which is quite complex, and I'm sticking to what I feel relates the most between the two technologies. What's my interest in this? What's my stance and who am I? So I learned sociocracy here in France, which is kind of a specific, and it's going to be part of some of the things I'm going to say with Université du Nou, which is a very huge organization that has spread these technologies in France. I'm a researcher. I'm at the University of Iceland, bizarrely, although I live in France. And I'm studying conversation and how we learn through conversation in this PhD. I also have practiced sociocracy in different organizations. So one of them is Learn to Change, and that was really interesting because we were a classical organization and we shifted towards sociocracy. So that was a very good process to learn about it. And then other groups here in which I'm also practicing sociocracy. So it's good to practice with different groups because then you see how different people understand different things and implement differently. So that's a very interesting point to be in. So theory U invites us to be aware of the place in which our attention and intention originates. It's interested mostly in leadership, and work on leadership usually focuses on the what and the how. So we know what leaders do, the processes that they use, but what is sorely missing is from where. What are the sources from which leaders operate? And theory U is specifically interested in that. And it sees two sources of learning and change. Learning from the past is something that is very well known. That's what we do. We get experiences, we get knowledge. That's the way we think we develop our learning. But learning from the future as it emerges is something that is still in its infancy. So when we act in the field, well, there's what's visible. It's what we say, what we do, what we think, what we sense, what we see. And there's something that is invisible, but is very active and present, which is the interior condition from which we are operating. So that's the originating source of all that we say, do, think, sense, and see. I'm going to put out now, right now from the start, a hypothesis that I have, that sociocracy is a technology that is very effective, but focusing on mostly these visible parts. And that theory U is bringing in focus that invisible part, those interior conditions that we have. And what I think is that theory U can enrich sociocracy and change sociocracy's social field. So that's what we're going to be looking at together. So operating from the future as it emerges. Big sentence, doesn't really mean anything. I think for me in the beginning, when I first saw that, I was like, okay, what is this again? Something that is actually quite deep. So learning from the future as it emerges is needed to meet today's challenges. In times of big disruptions and VUCA, everyone knows VUCA, vulnerability, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity that we are in today. Leaders need something to meet these challenges. And to meet these challenges, the fast pace of change, etc., they can do it only, they can't do it by only operating from what they have learned from the past. So the main question that we pose is that how can we learn to better sense and connect with future possibility that is seeking to emerge? The challenges that we face require us to become aware and change the inner place from which we operate, so the source. Operating from the future as it emerges is something that we name sensing and presencing. And the act of listening participates in both sensing and presencing. And what we're going to see is the different levels of listening that we can source in each of us. Operating from the future, sensing and presencing, the quality of listening is what makes the difference. Now we do this individually, but also collectively, seeking a source of attention and becoming aware of our inner places is needed. And I will cite Otto Scharmer, who is the main, there's a whole team working on this, but he's one of the main actors, and he's the one who wrote the book Theory U. This awareness is key. It's the single most important leverage point for shifting the social field in this century concerns the creation of a common consciousness. So here's the U, and we are looking mostly at, as I said, I'm going to look at the listening and presencing part. So we're looking at the left part of the image that you see here, because the right part is all that emerges from that in terms of action, the projects you do, the prototyping and performing in the world. So looking at the left part here, most of what we do, we spend a lot of time downloading. By downloading, what we mean here is that we are operating from ourselves, and we are letting ourselves be guided, for example, by things like confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is not theory U, it's social psychology, has shown that we tend to notice more the things that confirm what we already believe and think. And we tend to not see or ignore the things that are not confirming. Also, for example, attribution habits, which is also a psychosocial concept. What do we attribute success or failure to? What do we attribute our own success and failure to? Unless we change our ways of engaging with our environment, we can be stuck in attribution processes and in confirmation bias. So that's the downloading part. And what it takes is to suspend a little bit of disbelief, suspend previous beliefs, sometimes limiting ones, to start opening our mind. And here you have the second level, that is seeing. So Scharmer says that we spend most of our time doing these two levels of listening. And Theory U is inviting us to move beyond that and go into deeper places of listening, where we suspend the critical and cynical voice and we start entering into the field of sensing and presencing to operate from our deeper sources within. Presencing is here on the bottom, and you see that the open mind, open heart, open will participates in that. And that is what we call generative listening. So in generative listening, we forget about our own agenda and we begin to see the world as it unfolds through someone else's eyes. So we're here in empathic capacity to connect directly with another person or a living system. And we do this through sensing. That means we're going beyond words. When you're sensing something, and I'll give you an example later, words are not the most relevant or useful tools, and we'll see why. So our work here is to get out of our old self and open a space with a different presence that can manifest itself through us. Here are different sentences that can exemplify the different levels of listening. So, oh yeah, I know that already. We're really in downloading and confirmation bias. So it's the I in me. Oh, look at that. So it's a bit of surprise here. And I put these faces on the right to help you imagine and visualize. So here we're in factual listening. We are already attending to disconfirming data. Novelty, we're shifting from inner judgment and attending the data that is in front of us. This is like a scientific operating mode. It's the I in it. Now these two, within these two, we're still operating within the boundaries of our own mental cognitive organization. If we're going now deeper into sensing and presencing, we're going to activate our open heart. And here we have two examples. Oh, I know how you feel. So this is really the listening that allows us to be feeling and knowing with another person or another system. And the most sourced way of listening is when I'm sensing with my whole being. I'm quiet, I'm present, I'm connected with something that's larger to myself, and I'm ready here for generative listening. So we're moving from different levels of listening, and you see them again here. This is just another type of presentation of the same information, but I like this picture because you also see the verbs that come out very clearly, reconfirming for downloading, then noticing, seeing, and holding space. Because when you're in generative listening, you're entering a specific field where you are not here alone. So it's the I in you, and it's the generative listening that allows us to start holding this space with an open heart and an open will. So what does that mean in terms of how does it play out with sociocracy? Because this is this topic that is interesting for us today. And how do the structures of and dynamics of sociocratic meetings help us to go beyond the boundaries of our mental cognitive organization and to activate our open heart? That's the question I pose. Here you have a circle with 5 people, which is my best number for a circle. the one I like the best and I feel most comfortable in. In a meeting, in a Sociocratic meeting, we start with opening rounds. In my opinion, this is a place where we're listening to our feelings, our emotions, our state of mind, our state of body. So it's a good preparation to start operating from a deeper source. Very important part of the meeting. What we do is we do rounds. The fact that we do rounds, of course, gives equal access to participation. That's what it should do. Now, if we look at different examples or experiences that we have, we could start seeing, okay, what do these rounds do in terms of listening? Because you had a turn, does that guarantee that you're being heard? Or that your contribution exists within the whole? Do you have a guarantee for that just because you're going in rounds? Even if you're not interrupting, so maybe no one is listening or presencing to it, and so it becomes the same as interrupting when you're not listening, actually. And it's the same as not going in rounds. Here you have members talking. Okay, so each one receives and gives, and there's a conversation going on here in rounds. It can happen that a member of the circle is becoming marginalized, for example. And you can get into certain downloading patterns where you're thinking, I already know what Shirley is going to say. Or I have a general feeling that I've made up about my mind about someone. And for me, Eric is someone who always speaks nonsense. So I'm in this kind of pattern here, and this can be for many reasons. It can be for a different culture, for example. I've seen, for example, people from education having difficulty talking from people from other sectors. Or I've seen this nonprofit culture versus the business culture, for example. It can also be language. Do the people there have the same jargon? Or it can be values also. What is the order of our values? Do I value order and structure or more creativity? So all these things can be the place where such a dynamic starts. The 6 hats are a very good way, actually, to also start seeing how people are approaching decision-making and proposals in different ways. So take, for example, Orange here, who is marginalized. You see that this person is still receiving, but no longer contributing to the group. And if I take out, it can be also that there are subgroups within the circle. And here you see, for example, Orange and Blue have their own communication. They're responding to each other, but they are not feeding into the general process of the circle. So dynamics have to do a lot. These dynamics have a lot to do with presencing. In the clarification round, authentic questions can serve all the levels of listening. So that is something very strong that both technologies have in common. But notice how sometimes clarification questions are in fact hidden reactions. This, for example, can be a sign that the person is listening from habit. They didn't need to get more information before reacting. And this brings us to the question of reaction round, and the term reaction is probably problematic in the sense of theory U, because the theory exposes 4 levels of learning and responding to change. Level 1 is reacting, that is viewed as to respond by operating on the existing, not on the possibilities of the emerging, but on the habits and routines. And it's interesting because in France, we don't say reaction round, we say ressenti, which is more how do you feel? So we have a feel round after the clarification round. I will talk about consent and objection and consent later. I wanted to show you how In France, for example, when we had our training, we have something, a very important concept that is speaking at the center and listening to the center. So actually, you are not speaking to individuals within the group, but everyone is speaking to something that is at the center. Actually, when you're in a face-to-face meeting, there is an object that is put in the middle of the circle. And whenever there is kind of conflict or discussion, conversation is a bit sticky and difficult, then we are invited by the facilitator to speak to this object in the middle. It's absolutely amazing that when you do that, the personalization of the differences tends to disappear because everyone is speaking to this object in the middle. And this object in the middle, I think, is starting to represent what Theory U is saying, which is the sensing, the presencing at what is there for everyone in the group. So we're looking here more at the possibilities. We're entering easier to catch the implicit, to connect to the deeper sense. It creates more chance of holding a space for the new and something that is needs to be birthed. Also in this pattern, the tensions belong to the whole group and not to one person. So the root questions of Theory U are important also, and we'll be looking after that at the principles. But in terms of the root questions, connecting with our deepest source of creativity and ethical self and action, we become beings of freedom. And this we find also in other technologies, this importance of being free. And this nurtures connectedness and a deeply felt sense that all humankind is connected with a tacit bond. Also inclusion, a deeply felt sense that legitimacy flows from the structure that enables inclusive participation and participation to decision-making processes that shape our future. Authenticity is a deeply felt sense that we are on a journey to create a society that allows us to be who we really are, individually and collectively. And the three questions here, how can we create a more equitable economy? I think that's really one of the fields in which sociocracy operates strongly. How can we deepen democracy? We're here at the heart of sociocracy, deep decision-making processes. And how can we renew our culture? And sociocracy offers the culture of inclusion and voices heard. This is from the book. I love this book. This book is a real Bible. Everyone who's interested in sociocracy should have one. I go to it very regularly. And there is this figure that I really like, schema. And it concerns the topic of objection. Probably most of you have seen it. This diagram represents how we position ourselves in decision-making. So what is the range of preference and the range of tolerance? This thinking is going on in our mind. So we're in the cognitive here. And sometimes when it is conflictual, then we're also involving our heart in this affective and emotional positioning, facing a proposal. So the yellow arrows here are to point how presencing can help us expand our ranges. Because we're opening to the center, listening to the center, and we're seeking to see what emerges in a group. My interest here is to know the impact of presencing on, possible impact of presencing on individual ranges of tolerance, and possibly also on group ranges of tolerance. What I think is that as much as presencing can help individuals expand their ranges, the group will benefit from it too. And it's possible that there's an impact on the collective range here. I told you I was going to the principles, and that's what we're going to do now. So there are 6 principles in Theory U. Energy follows attention. So where you're putting your attention is where the things are going to happen, and what is not in your attention is what is going to be missing. Observe, observe, observe. This is something we also see in permaculture. It's interesting when you're looking at these different technologies to see how much they intersect. You retreat, you observe, you retreat, you reflect, you go inside to feel and sense and presence, and then you act in an instant. And we're going to see later, I have both principles of Theory U and Sociocracy, and things are very similar and different, so it's interesting. To do this 3-stage process that I just talked about, it works if we cultivate the inner instruments of our open mind, open heart, and open will. And at the source of this inner cultivation processes are at the root. There are 2 root questions. Who is myself? So what's my highest future possibility? And what is my work? So what's my purpose, for example? What attention and energy I can give that gives me as much energy as I put out energy to do. The 5th principle is 3 enemies. So why are these processes that I'm talking about the road less traveled? And Theory U says there are 3 enemies. It's the voice of judgment, which is shutting down the power to open our minds. It's the voice of cynicism, which is shutting down the power to open our heart. And the voice of fear that is shutting down the power to our open will. So the opening process is not only important to do as an individual, it also needs to involve the collective. Let's compare now both. On the right here, you have the principles of sociocracy that I find in one of those big figures also that you can see in the book. In green are things that really seem to mesh clearly together. In black, I wasn't sure, and in purple are some things that are very different in the 2. So I'm going to start with the greens. Judgment to curiosity for me, absolutely in Theory U. That one of the enemies is judgment, and you have to move on to other. Know when ignored, Theory U speaks about inclusion. Tensions point to lack of clarity. It's interesting that clarity is reached in Theory U when operating from the deeper source. So here we see really how the question of source can feed in really into sociocratic technology. Also, I found interesting empiricism. We take a decision now, it's good enough for now, it doesn't have to be for your whole life, etc. I find some similarity between that and the sense present, act in an instant. Because you're sensing, you can act in an instant. And because you're sensing, you can come back to it. So I think these things are all very, very similar. And I'm going to see here some differences. I saw win-win in the principles of sociocracy. There is no question of win or lose, actually, in Theory U. They're always talking about the collective. They actually don't go. It's the same thing for information, the bidirectional flow of information. Theory U speaks very little of information. Okay, Theory U is more focused on inner conditions and readiness to sense with a group. So these are things that are sound much more technical, probably in sociocracy, and that I did not find in Theory U. And the feedback, which is very important, comes from, is mentioned in both, with Theory U mentioning that the feedback is not only about information and enactments, but it's also about the inner source. So you're giving feedback on many different things. A very last example I want to give is when I was doing the course in Theory U, we had case clinics in coaching groups. It was one of the most amazing experiences I had. The fact that we were, so there's, it's almost like a circle, you know, step one, step two, so you're moving, everything is minutes, so you know where you're going, but this, you're hearing someone explain a case for 15 minutes and then you stop and you stay still and you connect with your interior, and you're supposed to not give advice. What you're supposed to do is get the image. You're going to have images that come to your mind. And I was absolutely flabbergasted to see that the images that came to me in all the cases, I did it 4 times, were so telling about the situation the person who was telling the case was in. And really, if you follow, it was very difficult for other people to do it. Many people were jumping into the advice phase. But if you really play the game and you don't give advice and you just give that image, you can see the face of the person who's receiving is like, ah. And it's just an image. One was a burning house with a person not wanting to save people who were in burning rooms, but not daring to go, because if they opened a door, it might bring in some air and make the whole house burn even more. And this was like so much what was happening, and it happens in the stillness. So this is something very powerful. And I was thinking, where could this be used most? And for me, it's in the picture forming, proposal shaping. In that first, it's a good idea to linger on that first phase of picture forming. We're looking at the dimensions of a problem, but maybe some sensing and presencing here would even make this process of picture forming, proposal shaping even stronger. There, that's the end. I wanted to just think about some few tools that we could use to bring in some Theory U into our practice. And I see reflective journaling, action research, a lot of cards and their games also to develop interior conditions. Feedback and evaluation are things that I see as very probable. And this is very helpful to enter in the presencing mode because it, do we say what we think, do we do what we say, do we see what we do, and do we recognize what we see? It's a very good tool to start thinking about how individually and in a group we're doing things. So this is the very last thought here. I think this is a possibility, as Theory U says, that suggests that there's a 4.0 or an ecosystem way of organizing, where we begin to cultivate the relationship by opening the minds, the hearts, the will to each other, with each other, and in order to engage in forms of learning and forms of transformation that are meaningful and functional, wherever hierarchical, I can never pronounce that word, structures are not useful. So integrating and weaving the presencing in sociocratic technology could announce the beginning of Sociocracy 4.0? Question mark.